Horemheb, also spelled Horemheb or Horemheb Ancient Egyptian, RMPB, meaning Horus is in jubilation. One was the last pharaoh of the 18th dynasty of Egypt 1550 to 1292 BC. 2. He ruled for at least 14 years, between 1319 BC and 1292 BC. 3. He had no relation to the preceding royal family other than by marriage to Mutnejmat, who is thought, though disputed, to have been the daughter of his predecessor. A. He is believed to have been of common birth. Pharaoh, reign, x 1319 to 1292 BC. Predecessor. A. Successor, Ramesses I consort. Amenia, Mutnejmat, children. Possibly Tonojmi, died 1292 BC. Burial. KV 57. Monuments, Memphite tomb. Temple of A and Horemheb. Dynasty. 18th dynasty. Before he became pharaoh, Horemheb was the commander-in-chief of the army under the reigns of Tutankhamun and A. After his accession to the throne, he reformed the Egyptian state, and it was during his reign that official action against the preceding Amarna rulers began, which is why he is considered the ruler who restabilized his country after the troublesome and divisive Amarna period. Horemheb demolished monuments of Akhenaten, reusing the rubble in his own building projects, and usurped monuments of Tutankhamun and A. Horemheb presumably had no surviving sons, as he appointed as his successor his vizier Parames, who would assume the throne, Ramesses I. Horemheb is believed to have originally come from Ans, on the west bank of the Nile, near the entrance to the Fayum. Since his coronation text formally credits the god Horus of Ans for establishing him on the throne, his parentage is unknown, but he is believed to have been a commoner. According to the French egyptologist Nicolas Grimel, Horemheb does not appear to be the same person as Potenemhaboten is present in Jubilation, who was the commander-in-chief of Akhenaten's army. Grimel notes that Horemheb's political career began under Tutankhamun, where he is depicted at this king's side in his own tomb chapel at Memphis, 242. In the earliest known stage of his life, Horemheb served as the royal spokesman for foreign affairs and personally led a diplomatic mission to visit the Nubian governors, to 242. This resulted in a reciprocal visit by the Prince of Mayam-Eba to Tutankhamun's court, an event depicted in the tomb of the Viceroy High, 240. Horemheb quickly rose to prominence under Tutankhamun, becoming commander-in-chief of the army and advisor to the pharaoh. Horemheb's specific titles are spelled out in his sacred tomb, which was built while he was still only an official, hereditary prince, fan-bearer on the right side of the king and chief commander of the army, the attendant of the king in his footsteps in the foreign countries of the south and the north, the king's messenger in front of his army to the foreign countries to the south and the north, and the sole companion, he who is by the feet of his lord on the battlefield on that day of killing Asiatics. When Tutankhamun died, while a teenager, Horemheb had already been officially designated as the Rapat or Iripat, basically the hereditary or crown prince and IDNW deputy of the king in the entire land by the child pharaoh. These titles are found inscribed in Horemheb's then private Memphite tomb at Saqqara, which dates to the reign of Tutankhamun since the child kings, Cartouches, although later usurped by Horemheb as king, have been found on a block which adjoins the famous Gold of Honor scene, a large portion of which is in Leiden. The royal couple depicted in this scene, and in the adjacent scene 76, which shows Horemheb acting as an intermediary between the king and a group of subject foreign rulers, are therefore to be identified as Tutankhamun and Ankhesenamun. This makes it very unlikely from the start that any titles of honors claimed by Horemheb in the inscriptions in the tomb are fictitious. The title Iripat, hereditary prince, was used very frequently in Horemheb's sacred tomb, but not combined with any other words. When used alone, the Egyptologist Alan Gardner has shown that the Iripat title contains features of ancient descent and lawful inheritance, which is identical to the designation for a crown prince. 10. This means that Horemheb was the openly recognized heir to Tutankhamun's throne, and not Tutankhamun's immediate successor. The Dutch Egyptologist Jacobus van Dijk observes, there is no indication that Horemheb always intended to succeed Tutankhamun. Obviously, not even he could possibly have predicted that the king would die without issue. It must always have been understood that his appointment as crown prince would end as soon as the king produced an heir, and that he would succeed Tutankhamun only in the eventuality of an early emperor. Childless death of the sovereign. There can be no doubt that nobody outranked the hereditary prince of Upper and Lower Egypt and deputy of the king in the entire land except the king himself, and that Horemheb was entitled to the throne once the king had unexpectedly died without issue. This means that it is A's, not Horemheb's, accession that calls for an explanation. Why was A able to ascend the throne upon the death of Tutankhamun, despite the fact that Horemheb had at that time already been the official heir to the throne for almost 10 years? If Horemheb was appointed as the crown prince at the beginning of Tutankhamun's reign, this means that the end of the royal bloodline was already arranged. If this arrangement was made, people like A, who were closely connected to the royal family, would not have accepted it. Although Horemheb had already boasted of his strength in his pre-royal career, the statements must have been exaggerated, especially in his i.e. Horemheb's coronation inscription, which was undoubtedly intended to propagate his legitimacy as the king. Notably, he called himself the eldest son of Horus, a title that regularly refers to the crown prince. For Van Dijk, this means that he was already the designated successor of Tutankhamun. Jansen, however, states that the eldest son was honorific and did not indicate the surviving heir to the throne. I would suggest that this expression seems to have been a propaganda title meaning the eldest son of Horus of Hutnesu, Horemheb's birthplace. 11. While no objects belonging to Horemheb were found in Tutankhamun's tomb, and items among the tomb goods donated by other high-ranking officials, such as Maya and General Nachman, were identified by Egyptologists, Nozomu Kawai maintains that Horemheb was an active participant at Tutankhamun's burial. Kawai writes, many scholars have suggested that Horemheb did not leave any evidence in Tutankhamun's tomb, while prominent persons such as A, Maya, and Nachman left either funerary items or iconographic images. However, the wall scene of the tomb shows Tutankhamun's coffin dragged by a group of officials in a mourning procession that contains a man who seems to be Horemheb Fig. 3. The lone figure standing behind the two viziers must be Horemheb, which also makes him situated closest to the mummy of Tutankhamun. This means that Horemheb acted as the leader of the funerary procession. 12. Kawai maintains rather that both A and Horemheb held important high administrative roles during Tutankhamun's reign, with A participating in royal cultic activities, whereas Horemheb acted as a royal military leader and legislator. 13. But after A became the pharaoh, his relationship with Horemheb changed. The aged vizier A initially succeeded Tutankhamun, possibly because he made an arrangement with Horemheb. However, during his brief 4-year reign, A proceeded to nominate Nachman as his successor, who A named as king's son, Ziansit. 14. Rather than Horemheb. The title of king's son Ziansit was clearly meant to designate the king's successor, and A, therefore, sidelined Horemheb's claim to the throne with this action. Ankhesenamun, Tutankhamun's queen, chose not to marry Horemheb, a commoner, and this also solidified A's kingship. Horemheb himself likely did not plot revenge on A, probably because A was old and would likely die soon, and merely kept his military power, notes Kawai. 15. After A's reign, which lasted for a little over 4 years, Horemheb managed to seize power, presumably thanks to his position as commander of the army, and to assume what he must have perceived to be his reward for having ably served Egypt under Tutankhamun and A. Horemheb resented A's attempt to sideline him from the royal succession and acted to quickly remove Nachman's rival claim to the throne and arranged to have A's WV-23 tomb desecrated by smashing the latter's sarcophagus, systematically chiseling A's name and figure out of the tomb walls and probably destroying A's mummy. Horemheb also usurped and enlarged A's mortuary temple at Medinet Habu for his own use, and erased A's titulary on the back of a 17-foot colossal statue by carving his own titulary in its place. Horemheb's actions against A were a damnatio memoria, to remove the memory of his rival from the historical records. However, he spared Tutankhamun's tomb from vandalism, presumably because it was Tutankhamun who had overseen his rise to prominence in the first place, and because he had no antagonism with Tutankhamun.